Desperate days for the UK's oldest comic. After 75 years in business, the Dandy could be about to close due to falling sales. In its heyday, the comic sold 2 million copies a week. Now it's down to just 8,000. Well, joining me is the comic historian Paul Gravett and the artist Gary Northfield, who used to draw for the Dandy. To you, first of all, Paul, for those of us of a certain era, and our brothers, I should say, as well, how sad is its demise?
I think it's a great shame because it's an institution, as you say, been going since 1970 for 75 years. It's not going to quite make its 75th birthday. Potentially it could be on its last skids, be put into the retirement home. And it's a question of, do kids still want comics? And silly, 8,000 sales is a tiny, tiny sales figure for any magazine. And it hasn't perhaps moved enough with the times. It hasn't perhaps innovated. Particularly, it hasn't perhaps brought in enough new characters that are as successful as Desperate Dan.
But you say, do children want comics? I mean, can we blame TV, video games, the things that always get blamed?
Yeah,
because
they always
some
get blamed.
comics are being bought, aren't they?
New attractions, new distractions are always coming along, of course, for kids. There's more than ever now. But the fact is, if you look at France and Belgium, you look at Japan, they've got as much of those things for kids as well. And they also have incredibly successful children's publishing situations. I mean, manga in Japan is huge. But that's because they are always innovating and always allowing creators to run with this new ideas. They're not stuck, in other words, with a character that's been around since 1937.
Gary, you used to draw for the Dandy. You brought in some copies here. This is a really modern one. This is a recent one.
Yeah, very recent.
And some slightly older ones. Here's a one from a few years ago, 2004, I believe that one. How iconic are the characters in this magazine, do you think?
Well, they're very iconic. Everybody knows Banana Man, everybody knows Desperate Dan and Corky the Cat. So, yeah, they're part of the kind of fabric of sort of British society. So, yeah, very, very important.
But they have tried to revamp it, haven't they? They've had comic strips and they've got things like from Harry Hill and Cheryl Cole. I mean, do you think that was the right route for a comic like this to go down?
Well, I mean, at the time, I thought it was a very exciting and interesting route to go. They were trying to break the barrier of, like, maybe, creators can't keep the rights of the characters. Let's try a different route. Let's get some interesting. People know Harry Hill. He's got a big kind of viewership on TV. Let's bring those readers in as well. People who don't normally read comics. Let's bring some different readership in. So.
But you're talking about Belgium and countries like that, and saying that children are reading magazines. They are reading magazines in this country too, aren't they? Because the Beano's got a 36,000 circulation a week, compared to the Dandy, which is just 8,000 a fortnight. So. What's so different about the Beano that it's getting the readers, but the Dandy
the Beano's always actually sold more. Actually, traditionally, it's been more successful. And of course, in '51, it acquired Dennis the Menace, and that was such an extraordinary transformation. It was a wild, crazy, anarchic character, the kind of character that kids could really enjoy, and was much closer to their real world. The argument is, okay, you can have fantasy stories like Desperate Dan, who's a super strong cowboy, but kids also like stories that are close to their own experience.
And Minnie the Minx, of course, is in the Beano as well. So that's something for the girls as well.
That whole wave in the 50s, and it's just a shame we haven't had a wave in the 21st century that could have actually rejuvenated the Dandy as it needed.
There is some talk that perhaps some of these strips, Desperate Dan, could be moved across to the Beano. I mean, how do you feel about that? Is it sacrilege in a way? Because I always remember them being sort of, you were either in the Beano camp or the Dandy camp, and never the twain should meet.
Well, it's probably like a natural route, because that used to happen a lot. Like when the Topper went and the Beezer went, all the sort of popular characters went along into the sort of surviving comics. So it's just a natural route, but it's a shame, yeah.
It's important to remember that we have still got, as you mentioned, the Beano selling well. We've got even bigger selling titles like Doctor Who Adventures and Moshimon and others that kids are getting into, often related to TV shows.
Yeah, and you brought in these are two popular ones, the Phoenix.
So yeah, the Phoenix is a brand new sort of weekly comic that's been going since January, and that really is a very exciting and amazing comic. It's got action strips, humour strips in there, and it's got serials as well as complete strips. Yeah, and then they take a different route. They don't go through the newsagent route. It's like independent bookshops, and they build up a very strong core audience.
It's a very appropriate name, the Phoenix, actually, in many ways, I think, from the Ashes.
But if you look at the people with children these days, everyone's standing around looking at their iPhones. Adults are now increasingly reading newspapers online and on their phones. Should we be surprised that the children aren't perhaps... They're just watching what we're doing, aren't they?
No, well, I think kids, I do a lot of workshops for like kind of schools and libraries, and kids are reading books. They love the Harry Potter, the Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Captain Underpants. So they do read. It's just availability and awareness of comics is the main problem, I would say.
I think maybe also putting the comics into apps. I could imagine, potentially a Dandy app. Why not? Where we can all subscribe to it on a weekly basis.
Well, indeed, and they're saying that these strips could be available online. So it may well be that we haven't perhaps seen the end of Desperate Dan after all, and his famous cow pie.
I think he'll make his 75th birthday. Yes.
It's been Paul Gravett and Gary Northfield. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Well, with the Olympics over.